My parents stole my $80,000 college fund to bankroll my brother's genius app, telling me to go to community college instead. They thought I'd just fade away, another forgotten daughter. They had no idea that for 10 years, I was building an empire fueled by their betrayal. And they certainly had no idea that the prestigious company they were pushing their now-failed son to apply to was the one where I would be conducting his final, humiliating interview for an internship. Before I tell you how I served the coldest revenge of my life, let me know in the comments what your dream career is. I want to celebrate the goals we fight for. And if my story resonates with you, please consider subscribing. It helps more stories of hard-won success reach the people who need to hear them. Now, let's get into it. 10 years ago, my life was supposed to begin. That's not just a turn of phrase. It was a concrete, tangible thing I could almost taste. The air in my bedroom was thick with the scent of cardboard from moving boxes and the promise of a future I had meticulously planned. The acceptance letter, printed on heavy, cream-colored cardstock from my dream university, was pinned to my corkboard like a holy relic. It was the first thing I saw when I woke up and the last thing I saw before I fell into an exhausted, excited sleep. Every part of me was vibrating with the energy of imminent departure, of a life about to be claimed. That life was built on a foundation of two things: my own hard-won grades and a promise from my parents. The promise was the $80,000 in my college fund, a sum they had spoken of since I was a child, a sacred pact that was meant to be my launchpad into the world. I remember the day it all fell apart with a clarity that still feels like a shard of glass in my memory. It was a Tuesday in August, hot and suffocatingly humid. The cicadas were screaming in the trees outside, a soundtrack of relentless, buzzing tension. I was in my room, trying to decide how many sweaters a person realistically needed for a Northern California autumn, when my mother, Karen, appeared at the doorway. Her face was pale, her smile stretched so tight it looked like it might snap. "Sarah, honey," she said, her voice unnaturally bright. "Can you come downstairs for a minute? Your father and I need to talk to you." My father, David, was already in the living room, standing by the fireplace, staring at the empty hearth as if it held the answers to the universe. He was a man who prided himself on his straightforwardness, but in that moment, he couldn't meet my eyes. The air in the room was heavy, stagnant. It was the kind of silence that precedes a storm or a diagnosis. I sat on the edge of the floral armchair, the one reserved for guests, and suddenly felt like I was one. My mother started, her words a rehearsed, clumsy dance. She talked about family, about supporting each other, about how sometimes one person's opportunity becomes everyone's opportunity. It was a long, rambling preamble that said absolutely nothing. I just watched her, my patience thinning with every meaningless platitude. Finally, my father sighed, a sound of pure defeat, and turned to face me. "Sarah," he said, his voice raspy, "the college fund is gone." The words didn't register at first. They were just sounds, disconnected from meaning. Gone. How could it be gone? It was an account, a number on a statement. It wasn't a set of keys you could misplace. "What do you mean, gone?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. And that's when my older brother, Josh, walked into the room. He didn't just walk. He sauntered, a self-satisfied smirk plastered on his face. He was holding a sleek, brand-new laptop, a toy I knew we couldn't afford. He leaned against the doorframe, all casual arrogance, as if he were watching a moderately interesting play unfold. His presence was the final piece of the puzzle, and my blood ran cold. "We gave it to Josh," my mother blurted out, the words tumbling out in a rush, as if saying them quickly would lessen their impact. "For his new app. It's a social media platform for influencers. It's revolutionary." Revolutionary. The word hung in the air, absurd and obscene. Josh had been flitting between revolutionary ideas since he was 16. None of them had ever amounted to anything more than a new line of debt on our parents' credit cards. He was their golden boy, the one with potential, a vague, shimmering quality they valued far more than my tangible, hard-earned results. My acceptance letter, my straight A's, my scholarship offers, they were solid, real. Josh's potential was smoke. And they had traded my future for his smoke. "It's a sure thing, Sarah," my father insisted, finally finding some conviction. "The investors are lining up. This is the best investment for the whole family's future. When Josh makes it big, he'll pay you back 10 times over." Josh just nodded along, his smirk widening. "Yeah, Sarah, chill out. It's for the family." Then he delivered the line that would echo in my head for the next decade, the line that severed the final thread of my childhood. "You can always go to community college for a bit. It's practically free." I looked from my parents' pleading, guilty faces to my brother's smug, dismissive one. I saw the dynamic laid bare. I wasn't their daughter in that moment. I was a line item that had been sacrificed. I was the supporting character whose subplot had been cut to free up the budget for the star. The betrayal was so profound, so absolute, it was almost silent. There was no screaming, no yelling, just a sudden, vast emptiness where my love and trust for them used to be. I stood up, the floral pattern of the armchair seeming to mock me with its cheerful banality. I didn't say a word. I walked past them, out of the living room, and up the stairs to my bedroom. I closed the door, and the first thing I did was take the acceptance letter off my corkboard. I folded it carefully, once, then twice, and slipped it into a book on my shelf. The dream wasn't dead, but the path to it had just turned into a cliff I would have to climb with my bare hands. In the silence of my room, with the sound of my family's muffled justifications filtering through the door, I made a new plan. My own. The 10 years that followed were a study in parallel lives, a stark split-screen montage that might have been compelling in a film but was simply exhausting to live through. My world shrank to a grueling triangle, a pre-dawn shift at a greasy spoon diner, afternoon classes at Northwood Community College, and late-night cleaning shifts at a soulless corporate office park. My life was measured in hours of sleep I didn't get, in the persistent ache in my lower back, and in the smell of bleach that seemed permanently embedded in my clothes. The diner was a symphony of clattering plates and burnt coffee. I'd be on my feet by 5 a.m., tying on a cheap, grease-stained apron, my mind still foggy with sleep. I learned to balance 3 plates on one arm, to smile through the condescending remarks of businessmen who saw me as nothing more than a pair of hands to deliver their eggs. The tips were my lifeline. Every crumpled dollar bill, every handful of loose change was a small victory, another tiny step toward the tuition for my next semester. I remember one regular, a kind-faced truck driver named Al, who always left a $5 tip on a $2 coffee. He'd ask me what I was studying, and when I told him computer science, his eyes would light up. "You're gonna build the future, kid," he'd say. On the hardest days, that simple belief from a stranger was the only thing that kept me going. After my shift, I'd rush to the campus, often still smelling faintly of bacon grease. I'd find a seat in the back of a crowded lecture hall, my textbooks bought second-hand, their pages filled with the notes of students who had come before me. I was a ghost in those hallways, too tired and too busy to make friends. My lunch break was a frantic 30 minutes in the library, hunched over a keyboard, trying to cram in lines of code before my next class. I learned Java, Python, and C++ not just in the classroom, but through sheer, bloody-minded repetition in those stolen moments. I saw the other students, fresh-faced and carefree, talking about parties and weekend trips. Their college experience was a world away from mine. Mine was a transaction, a necessary ordeal to be endured. The nights were the loneliest. From 8 p.m. to midnight, I pushed a janitorial cart through the empty, echoing corridors of the office park. The silence was absolute, broken only by the hum of the fluorescent lights and the rhythmic squeak of my mop. It was here, in the sterile quiet, that I did my real work. I'd finish my duties early and then, hiding in an empty cubicle, I'd pull out my cheap, refurbished laptop. Fueled by stale coffee from the break room and a burning, relentless spite, I coded. I built my own projects, I contributed to open source repositories, I taught myself algorithms that were years ahead of my coursework. That office park was my real university. It was where I hammered my anger and my grief into something sharp, something useful. It was where I became a programmer. Meanwhile, Josh was living the life they had bought for him with my future. His social media was a curated gallery of his CEO lifestyle. There were pictures of him and his friends on a rented boat, champagne flutes in hand. There were posts from expensive restaurants where the entrees cost more than my weekly grocery budget. He leased a flashy sports car and a sleek downtown apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows. He was playing the part of a tech mogul, a visionary. But he wasn't building anything. He was just burning through cash. As I had predicted, his revolutionary app was a catastrophic failure. It launched with a dozen bugs and a user interface that was impossible to navigate. The influencers he'd paid to promote it abandoned it within a week. The company folded in less than 6 months. But for our parents, it wasn't a failure. It was a learning experience. They gave him more money for his next idea, a subscription box for artisanal dog treats. That failed too. Then came the plan for a dropshipping business selling smart water bottles. Another failure. With each collapse, he'd retreat home to our parents, who would soothe his bruised ego and write another check. They never asked him to get a job, to face the consequences. His potential was always just one great idea away. I never called them. They never called me. I heard about Josh's life through the grapevine of family gossip, relayed to me by a well-meaning aunt who couldn't understand my silence. I'm sure my parents painted me as the bitter, ungrateful daughter. They probably told everyone I was stubborn, that I was punishing them. They had no idea. I wasn't punishing them. I was forgetting them. I was erasing them from my equation. Every dollar I earned, every line of code I wrote, every sleepless night I endured was a brick I was laying in the foundation of a new life, a life they would have no part in. The grind wasn't just about survival, it was about building a fortress. The transition from the grind to the rise wasn't a sudden explosion, it was a slow, deliberate climb. It began with a single email in my final year of college. A recruiter from a small but respected tech firm called Innovate Dynamics had stumbled upon my portfolio on an online coding forum. He was impressed by a complex data visualization tool I had built in my spare time, the very project I had perfected during those lonely nights in the office park. He offered me a junior developer position. It wasn't my dream university, but it was a door, and I kicked it open. I started at the bottom. I was the one fetching coffee, taking notes in meetings, and fixing the bugs that the senior developers didn't want to touch. But I wasn't just a junior developer, I was a survivor. The work ethic forged in the diner and the janitor's closet was my secret weapon. I didn't just meet deadlines, I beat them. I didn't just solve problems, I anticipated them. I consumed knowledge like I had been starved for it, staying late not because I had to, but because I wanted to understand every single layer of the systems we were building. Within 2 years, I was promoted to a mid-level developer. A year after that, I was leading a small team. Innovate Dynamics was growing, and I was growing with it. I found a mentor in the company's CTO, a woman named Lena who saw the same relentless fire in me that she had in herself. She taught me not just how to code, but how to lead, how to design systems, how to navigate the sharp-elbowed politics of the corporate world. She taught me how to turn my technical skills into real power. My life began to change. I moved out of my dingy basement apartment and into a bright, modern condo downtown. I replaced my beat-up sedan with a new car that didn't threaten to break down at every stoplight. I could buy groceries without frantically adding up the cost in my head. But the habits of the grind died hard. I was still frugal, still woke up early, still felt a flicker of anxiety if I wasn't working on something. The biggest change was that the spite that had fueled me for so long began to cool, replaced by a quiet, unshakable confidence. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was succeeding. Then, about 8 years into my 10-year silence, Innovate Dynamics exploded. After securing a massive round of venture capital funding, the company went on a meteoric rise. We launched a flagship product, a cloud-based enterprise software suite that I had personally designed the core architecture for, and it became an industry standard almost overnight. Our company name was suddenly everywhere, in tech journals, on business news channels, on billboards along the highway. We announced a massive hiring spree, poaching talent from Silicon Valley giants. Innovate Dynamics became the most talked about, most prestigious, and highest-paying tech employer in the entire state. For anyone in the tech field, getting a job with us was like winning the lottery. By this time, I was the lead software architect for our most profitable division. I was no longer just a programmer, I was a strategist. I managed a team of 30 brilliant engineers. I sat in boardrooms with executives and made decisions that affected millions of dollars. I had become the person I had dreamed of being, but I had gotten there on a path I could never have imagined. I had built my fortress, and it was impenetrable. It was during our latest major project launch that the past finally came knocking. The workload was immense, and my team was stretched thin. "Sarah," Lena told me in our weekly one-on-one, "you need help. You can't be handling the high-level architecture and debugging junior-level code. The budget is approved. Hire a paid intern. Get someone to handle the grunt work, the boring stuff, so you can focus on the big picture." The idea was a relief. An extra pair of hands to manage the data logs, organize documentation, and handle the repetitive tasks would be a godsend. That afternoon, HR sent me the first batch of digital resumes. I poured myself a cup of coffee, sat down at my large, minimalist desk overlooking the city, and began to sift through the applications, completely unaware that a ghost from my past was about to appear in the pile. The resumes flowed into my inbox in a steady stream, a digital parade of ambition. They were from bright-eyed university students with perfect GPAs, from eager young professionals looking to get a foot in the door at the hottest company in the state. Each one was a carefully curated story of success and potential. I was looking for someone diligent, someone who wasn't afraid of the unglamorous work that underpins every great technological achievement. I had a stack of promising candidates flagged within the first hour. Meanwhile, a different kind of drama was unfolding 50 miles away, in the beige suburban house I once called home. Josh, now in his early 30s, had officially washed out. His last venture, a convoluted cryptocurrency scheme, had imploded, taking the last of our parents' savings with it. Broke, humiliated, and with a string of failures trailing behind him like a funeral procession, he had moved back into his childhood bedroom. His return was not a quiet one. My aunt, the family's self-appointed news anchor, had given me the update in a hushed, pitying phone call I had foolishly answered. According to her, my parents were frantic. Their golden boy's shine had finally worn off, revealing the cheap plating underneath. Their denial, however, remained resolute. It wasn't that Josh had failed, it was that the world had failed to recognize his genius. They saw the Innovate Dynamics hiring spree as a divine intervention, a lifeline thrown directly to them. The company's name was inescapable, on the local news, on their social media feeds, on the lips of their neighbors. "This is it, Josh," my father would say every morning, shoving a newspaper with our company's logo in front of him. "This is your big second chance. A company like that, they understand vision. It's perfect for your potential." They hounded him relentlessly. My mother would sit with him for hours, helping him tweak his resume, a document that was more fiction than fact. They saw it as his grand re-entry into the world of success, a way to finally validate the massive, life-altering investment they had made in him 10 years ago. For Josh, it was a prison. He was trapped by their expectations, by his own failures, and by a desperate, gnawing need to prove he wasn't the loser he secretly knew he had become. So he did what he was told. He went to the Innovate Dynamics career portal and, with a click of his mouse, he mass applied for every single open position he could find, from senior project manager all the way down to the 6-month, paid internship in the cloud architecture division. Back in my quiet, minimalist office, I was on my third cup of coffee and my eyes were starting to glaze over from reading endless lists of qualifications. I clicked on the next resume in the queue without much thought. The name loaded first. Josh Jennings. I froze. My hand hovered over the mouse. My breath caught in my throat. It couldn't be. It had to be a different Josh Jennings. But then the rest of the document populated the screen, and my blood ran cold. It was him. The resume was a masterpiece of delusion. It was a train wreck you couldn't look away from. The timeline was a patchwork of short-lived, self-aggrandizing titles: founder and CEO, chief visionary officer, lead innovator. The job descriptions were stuffed with meaningless buzzwords: synergized, disrupted, ideated, all used to mask the simple fact that every single one of his companies had failed. There were huge gaps in employment, papered over with vague consulting gigs. It was the resume of a man who had never been held accountable for anything in his life. It was pathetic. I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking in the silent office. Any other hiring manager would have deleted it in a heartbeat. It was the application of a charlatan, a deeply unserious person. But I wasn't any other hiring manager. I saw past the buzzwords and the inflated titles. I saw the desperation. He was applying for an internship, the lowest rung on the corporate ladder, a position meant for a 20-year-old college student. He was at the end of his rope. A feeling washed over me, something cold and clear and powerful. It wasn't anger anymore. The fiery rage of my 18-year-old self had long since cooled, forged into the steel of my ambition. This was something else. It was the feeling of a predator seeing its prey wander directly into a perfectly set trap. It was the feeling of a 10-year-old story finally reaching its climax. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. I moved my mouse, dragged the file out of the rejection pile, and placed it squarely at the top of the interview list. The day of the interview felt charged, electric. I woke up that morning with a sense of calm purpose I hadn't felt in years. I chose my outfit with meticulous care, a sharply tailored black dress, severe and professional. No jewelry, no bright colors. I wanted to be an embodiment of the corporate authority I had earned, a figure he couldn't possibly associate with the sister he had last seen as a heartbroken teenager. I walked into the office, my heels clicking a steady, resolute rhythm on the polished concrete floors. I was not Sarah Jennings, the wronged daughter. I was Ms. Jennings, the hiring manager. I instructed my assistant to put him in conference room 3, a glass-walled room in the center of our open-plan office, colloquially known as the fishbowl. I wanted him to be on display. I had our head of HR, a pleasant but no-nonsense woman named Linda, join me. Her presence would legitimize the process and ensure everything was done by the book. It would also serve as a witness. He arrived 15 minutes early, a sheen of sweat already on his brow. I watched him from my desk as my assistant led him to the room. He was wearing a suit that was at least 5 years out of style, the fabric slightly too shiny under the fluorescent lights. It was the kind of suit a man wears when he wants desperately to project an image of success that he does not feel. He walked into the fishbowl, looking around at the bustling office with wide, hungry eyes. He still had that faint air of entitlement, the belief that a place like this was where he fundamentally belonged. We let him wait for precisely 10 minutes. Long enough for his nerves to fray, long enough for his initial confidence to curdle into anxiety. Then, Linda and I stood up and walked towards the conference room. He was standing when we entered, a practiced, charming smile already forming on his lips. He extended a hand towards Linda. "Josh Jennings," he said, his voice booming slightly too loud. "A real pleasure." Then he turned to me. His eyes met mine. The charming smile didn't just fade, it shattered. It was as if his entire nervous system had been hit with a taser. His hand, still extended in midair, froze for a split second before dropping to his side. His face, which had been a mask of confident affability, went completely blank. All the color drained from it, leaving behind a pasty, sickly gray. In his eyes, I saw a frantic, panicked scramble as his brain tried to reconcile the image of his little sister with a woman in the power dress sitting at the head of the conference table. "Josh," I said, my voice perfectly level, betraying nothing. "Thank you for coming in. This is Linda, from HR. Please, have a seat." He stumbled into the chair, his movements clumsy and uncoordinated. The interview began. I treated him like any other candidate. I was polite. I was professional. And I was absolutely, mercilessly brutal. I picked up his resume, the one I had printed out and marked up with red ink. "So, Josh," I began, my voice cool and even. "Your resume is certainly ambitious. Let's start with your first company, Connect Sphere. You list yourself as founder and CEO. Can you walk me through the specific reasons for its financial failure and subsequent liquidation in under 6 months?" He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. Well, he stammered, "it was the market. Very volatile. And some early seed funding fell through." He was grasping at straws, using the vague, blameless language of someone who has never had to explain a failure. "I see," I said, making a small note on the page. "And your next venture, Possum Provisions. A subscription box for artisanal dog treats. You were the chief visionary officer. The public records show the company dissolved with significant outstanding debts to its suppliers. What specific skills did you acquire from that experience that you believe would be applicable to an internship role here at Innovate Dynamics?" His eyes darted around the room, looking for an escape he couldn't find. He was sweating freely now, a single bead tracing a path down his temple. "Team building," he mumbled. And brand marketing." "Brand marketing," I repeated, my tone flat. "Interesting." Because our research indicated the primary customer complaint was a lack of any coherent branding. Let's move on. For 20 excruciating minutes, I dissected his life's work. I dismantled every inflated title, questioned every vague accomplishment. I used the language of corporate accountability, a language he had never been forced to learn. I wasn't angry. I wasn't emotional. I was a surgeon, calmly and precisely cutting away the layers of delusion and entitlement he had wrapped himself in for a decade. Linda from HR sat beside me, her expression neutral, occasionally making a note on her own pad. Her presence made it all the more humiliating for him. This wasn't a family squabble. This was a professional assessment of his utter and complete inadequacy. By the end, he was a broken man. He was slumped in his chair, his cheap suit seeming to swallow him whole. The last vestiges of his bravado were gone, replaced by the raw, undisguised shame of a man forced to confront his own reflection for the first time. The golden boy had finally tarnished. "Thank you for your time, Josh," I said, closing the folder. "We have a few more candidates to interview. HR will be in touch." He could only nod, unable to speak. He practically fled the room, leaving the faint scent of fear and desperation in his wake. As the glass door swung shut behind him, I allowed myself a small, private moment of satisfaction. The interview was over. But the justice was just beginning. The day after the interview was a quiet one. I went about my work with a focused, almost serene efficiency. My team was buzzing about the new project, and I guided them through complex architectural problems with the same calm authority I had displayed in the fishbowl. But beneath the surface of my professionalism, a 10-year-old story was reaching its final chapter. I let Josh stew in his uncertainty for a full 48 hours. I wanted him to replay that humiliating interview over and over in his head. I wanted him to oscillate between the faint, desperate hope that he might still get the job and the crushing certainty that he had failed. I wanted him to understand what it felt like to have his future hanging in the balance, completely at the mercy of someone else's decision. On the third day, I made the call. I waited until late in the afternoon, when I knew the weight of the unanswered silence would be at its heaviest. I dialed the number from his resume, and it rang 3 times before he picked up. "Hello." His voice was a nervous squeak, thin and reedy. All the booming confidence from the start of the interview was gone. "Josh, this is Sarah Jennings from Innovate Dynamics," I said, my voice formal and crisp. I could hear a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. "Oh," he said. "Hi. I'm calling to follow up on your interview for the software architecture internship position," I continued, letting a professional, neutral pause hang in the air for a beat too long. "After careful consideration of all the candidates, we would like to formally offer you the position." There was a profound silence on the other end. It wasn't the silence of joy or relief. It was the silence of utter disbelief, of a man who couldn't process what he was hearing. I could almost hear the frantic gears turning in his head. Was this a trick? A joke? You're offering me the job?" he finally managed to say, his voice laced with confusion. "That's correct," I said. "It's a 6-month contract, 40 hours a week. The pay is minimum wage, as stated in the job description. Your duties will include, but are not limited to, managing and logging server data, organizing technical documentation, scheduling meetings for the senior architectural team, and other various administrative tasks as assigned." I paused again, letting the list of menial duties sink in. "And yes, that will sometimes include fetching coffee." I could hear the sound of his pride being swallowed. This wasn't the grand second chance his parents had envisioned. This wasn't a validation of his potential. This was the bottom rung of the ladder. It was a job a college sophomore would do to get experience. And for him, it was the only lifeline he had left. The silence stretched on, thick with his humiliation. He knew exactly what this was. He knew this wasn't an act of forgiveness. It was a sentence. Finally, I heard a faint, choked sound. "I accept." I leaned back in my executive leather chair, a chair that had cost more than his first car. I looked out the floor-to-ceiling window of my corner office, at the sprawling cityscape I had conquered while he had been failing. The view was clear and bright. "Good," I said, my voice calm, even, and utterly final. "I'm glad we're in agreement." I let the silence sit for one last moment before delivering the words I had been waiting 10 years to say. "You know, Josh, it's funny how things work out. You and our parents invested my future in your dream. Now, my success will fund your reality." He didn't say anything. There was nothing he could say. "Your start date is Monday," I concluded. 9 a.m. sharp. Don't be late." I hung up the phone before he could reply, the click of the receiver ending the call echoing in my quiet office. It was a small, definitive sound that closed a chapter of my life. The anger was gone. The hurt was gone. All that remained was a sense of balance. The scales, which had been tipped so unjustly against me for a decade, had finally been set right. Justice hadn't been a fiery, explosive event. It had been a quiet, deliberate, and perfectly executed business transaction. And it was the sweetest victory I could have ever imagined.